Welcome to Oceanside Chat. This podcast was created to inspire, motivate, and provide insight through industry professionals sharing personal stories, career aspirations, and practical advice. Jimmy Anklesaria is a San Diego local entrepreneur, author, and philanthropist. In addition to launching several companies, Jimmy has always found time to share his experiences with academia since 1985. He has been associated with the Rady School of Management from the very first cohort, provided scholarships, and endowed a chair for supply chain management at the school. Time to get your feet wet in the business world and join us down by the water as we have an Oceanside Chat. Season 2, Episode 1, Cost Management, from leveraging volume to leveraging ideas.
Welcome to Season 2 Oceanside Chat. I'm Helen Wang, the host and editor for the program. I want to welcome students, faculty, and industry professionals who attend the live event today. Since 2020, the world has been experiencing an unprecedented pandemic and supply chain disruptions. Today, we live in a global crisis of broken supply chains and ongoing supply shortages that impact every household. Looking forward, the US inflation spiked at a 40-year high, which accelerated price increases for commodities and durable goods, such as cars, gas, food, and furniture. If you are curious to understand why the supply chain crisis happened, how to solve those problems, and what you can do to help, I hope to present a broad range of perspectives in the next 10 episodes, along with our distinguished guests. For the first episode, I'm pleased to introduce Jimmy Anklesaria, who is our founder and chair emeritus of the Institute for Supply Chain Excellence and Innovation at UC San Diego. Jimmy is also an entrepreneur, a philanthropist, and one of America's leading authorities in the field of cost management. Jimmy, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Helen. Wow, this is great.
If you have a time machine, would you go back time or into the future?
Actually, I'd love to go back in time because I'm an old nostalgic guy. I love to go back. And quite honestly, Helen, whatever little success I've had, or if I've been able to make others successful, I believe in connecting the two. It's looking in the rearview mirror, which gives us history, and using those experiences to drive the future. So I've always believed that good leaders are students of history. And so I'd have to say I'd like to go back in time because, as you get older, you forget. So I'd like to go back and remember what I did in the last 35 years and then use those experiences to push out the future.
Well, wonderful, because we'll give you plenty of opportunity to remember some of the things you have done before. If you have an unlimited supply of one thing for the rest of your life, what is it?
Oh, love, without a doubt. Yeah, I just believe that love and kindness, we are all into this material world and we want plenty of real estate and plenty of money. And I'd say at this stage, all we need is love and compassion for human beings. We're forgetting that.
Yeah, I think especially under the pandemic, love might be the cure for all the pain that we have gone through in the past few years.
I guess I'm a romantic old fool. I still believe that goodness always prevails, and I'll still push on that.
Obviously already very famous in terms of cost management. But if you were famous, besides that, what would you be famous for?
I think helping others, I feel that I'm being very greedy, Helen, because I just cannot tell you the satisfaction I get by helping others. And I've had the good fortune, both with the monetary and also the education and experiences, I've been able to help others. And I think that's about the best anyone can ask for. So if I'd like to be known, it's changing other people's lives, whether it's mentoring a student and putting them into the track, just the same way I was when I was a student, or to help people financially with whether it's financial aid or helping CPOs with some words of wisdom, that I've been very fortunate to pick up over the past because of a fantastic network. So I'd say it's just about helping others and giving back.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I also know that you love cooking.
Oh, yeah, I do. I sure do love cooking, yeah.
So
And
what is
I
your
feel
favorite
so.
meal to cook?
Ah, dear, dear. There's nothing favorite. It's more or less in a blend of Persian and Indian food because I come from a ethnic background that migrated to India from Persia. So it's got a Persian sort of background, but an Indian flavor to it. And I love cooking. And unfortunately, some of my students here, I wish it was not in the same stage as we were before COVID, where I used to invite my whole class and enjoyed cooking for them. So someday in the future, we'll do that.
Yeah, I bet your student could taste the love from your meal
Okay.
while you're
Well,
cooking it.
okay. Well, whatever you take in, I'm happy if people leave with a smile and not grunting. But wow. So how did you cook this up, Helen?
Yeah, we started beautifully. Right? We have the Oceanside chat and we talked about love and helping others. And then we talk about cooking, so just to get people know you a little better. So
Okay.
Jimmy, you have written the book, Supply Chain Cost Management, the Aim and Drive Process for Achieving Extraordinary Results. You're
Mhm.
also the co-author of Zero-Based Pricing, Achieving World-Class Competitiveness Through Reduced All-in Costs. You give workshops and seminars to Fortune 500 companies around the globe and teach college students about cost management. In the past 30 years, you established yourself as an expert and made a successful career in the field of cost management. I'm curious, is this what you wanted to be when you grow up?
Not in the least bit. In fact, if my dad, God bless his soul, ever thought that this is what I was going to do, I would have been shocked myself, let alone shocking my family. No, absolutely not, Helen. But that's what I advise all my students and anyone I mentor. The train passes by and you're on a station, and the question is, do I jump on this train or wait for the next one? And I chose to jump on this procurement slash purchasing slash supply chain slash value chain, whatever you call it. I jumped onto that train, and then I just changed the compartments inside there. I keep going from one compartment to the other. But no, I was born into an entrepreneurial family and was expected to take, a more active part. And I guess, like many others in this meeting, there was a mentor of mine, David Burt, at the University of San Diego, who convinced me about this field, and particularly with my entrepreneurial background and cost management, which was being a chartered accountant or a CPA, as you'd call it, kind of nudged me in that direction. So no, I would never in my wildest dreams have thought that I'd be doing what I'm doing today.
Yeah, so you met a professor and that became your source of inspiration, but you clearly took this entire journey, way beyond just accountant. I mean, you started doing this whole concept of cost management. So how did it happen?
I think it's back to that blend of the accounting and law background and the MBA and all that academic background and the practical background, because, being in an entrepreneurial position, my family owned the entire bottling plant, making about 750,000 to 1 million bottles a day. I didn't even know I was in a supply chain. But then I came to America, and that's how I got pushed in or pulled in by David Burt. Never regretted it. This has been the greatest change I made in my life. But to be exact, it was 36 years ago.
Wow. Being an expert for cost management, I want to challenge you a little bit. How would you describe the cost management to a 5-year-old?
Oh, wow. I think the word is manage and not dictate. A 5-year-old, you can't say, well, do something because daddy says so or mommy says so. Cost management is about education. You've got to educate the person on the other side. I always feel, and that's something I hold very dearly, my students here will know, in the very first case study that we do in our class, we bring out this issue. In the past, costs have never been managed. They've been challenged by what I call bullying buyers who feel that, we have the power, we have the money, and they bully the supplier, and they come across as auditors, right? Why is this so high? Why is this that? Why is this? Versus the educator. And I think a good procurement person, a good supply chain analyst would be someone educating the other side, just like we have to educate a 5-year-old. You don't do this because you can get hurt, not because I say so. So it's back to education, and that's where I've spent the last 36, 37 years, where I've been in industry, but I've been taking those experiences and educating, not 5-year-olds, but maybe 25-year-olds and 35-year-olds. But it's all about education. That's what you do to a 5-year-old. That's what you do to a supplier.
I see. So that's very interesting because we completely shifted from a management concept to an education responsibility for people to understand this. I know you have plenty of stories, helped other companies being successful. So could you share a story or give us an example about how you helped the companies to achieve their cost management goal?
Well, right next to you on my screen is Lou Ferretti, and I think Lou was one of the few who was on my journey from day one at IBM. So lovely to have Lou, and it hasn't changed whether it was at HP or IBM or Nokia, Motorola, or any of the other companies. It was the same thing. Initially, it was always about working with the leader. In this case, it was a common, let's say, mentor to Lou and myself, and that was Gene Richter. And it was all about, there you go, what, 1994. Yes, thank you, Lou. 1994 it was. And it was about educating the senior leadership. I was very honored to have had the opportunity to share the roadmap and the vision with people like Jerry York, who was the Chief Financial Officer, and Lou Gerstner, the CEO of IBM. And then it was about laying out a plan. And the plan was the two books. We start with zero-based pricing, cost modeling, and making sure that we cannot manage what we don't understand. So understanding cost comes from cost analysis, cost modeling. So we went through that process at IBM, but there's a stage when, okay, so you know the cost, you know the price, you know the market trends, what else? Then it has to switch from that mindset of negotiating with cost knowledge to breakthrough thinking. And breakthrough thinking was this process I developed called AIM and Drive, and it's an 8-step process that incorporates the best of strategic planning, goal setting, activity-based costing, lean, Six Sigma, everything that was prevalent during my educative years. And I took all of that and put it through the funnel of common sense. So it was common sense really that made this more successful, and working with suppliers. So whether it was at IBM or any of the other big companies I've had the privilege of working with, the formula was the same. It's what I call the little Coca-Cola magic formula. You just put that little formula in and it works.
So if you would explain to an executive, let's say, why is cost management important?
Oh, that's pure back to finance. In fact, back to Lou. You see, the thing about cost management is that cost savings and genuine sustainable cost savings. And I want to make sure people understand cost management is different from cost cutting. You can cut costs. That's very easy. Cut the people, cut no more donuts, no more coffee, no more this, no more travel. Okay, that's cost cutting. That's not cost management. But a good cost management program returns a phenomenal ROI. Simple example. In fact, that's what Helen made the change in my life when David Burt, he convinced me through this analogy, not purchasing and supply chain and stuff. What he said is, Jimmy, you've got many companies, take any one of them, okay? And take a number like 100 being the total revenue, simple example. So out of a total revenue of 100, let's say you have a 5% net margin, EBIT. And so it's a $5 million profit on $100 million revenue. Simple example. What percentage of that, he said, Jimmy, what percentage of that would you spend on third parties for raw materials and services, right? I'd say about 70%, right? So if you have a 5% profit, 70% is going towards your third party, which we call other costs, not your own cost. Your own costs are on top of that. But this is third party, and you save 10%. Simple example. That means for every 100 million, 70 million is spent, of which you save 10%. That is $7 million. You have a profit of 5. You add 7. You increase your profit 140%. Now you convert that into multiple, where you start looking at the finance world of the multiples on PE ratios and stuff like that. One, if it's a sustainable thing that you can repeat, it's a process, it's not just a one-time cut. You can take your multiple, let's say your multiple is a typical average of 15 to 20. You can go up to a 20, 25 because you've shown that you've got the ability to do it again and again. Now you start converting that into stock price, and it's like a wow. So you can ask Lou, in May of 1995, we had a meeting at IBM for all the global procurement. It was in Palisades. And the day before that, I bought a few thousand shares of IBM at $40. Okay. And when I made my presentation, I challenged IBMers. I said, I just invested in you. I'm not a consultant. Okay. I'm an investor. And I've just paid quite a few tens of thousands of dollars to buy your stock. So here's my challenge. Here's the roadmap. We're going to do what we did and what Gene Richter is going to lead you through. This is what we're going to do in 2 years. I'm going to come back here after 2 years. And my challenge to you is $160, 2 years, right? From 40 to 160, because we had already planned. This is what we're going to do. This is the challenge that we were given to and accepted from Lou Gerstner. And we're going to put this money into the bottom line in 2 years. And 2 years later, it was in Raleigh-Durham. We had the same global procurement managers meeting. And those days, Helen, we used to have those slides that we put on the overhead projector. And my first slide that I put onto that overhead projector was, thank you for accepting and meeting the $160 challenge. The day before that, IBM closed 169. Of course, that's a little coincidence, no question about it, but it is the fact that IBM was really, really grateful, so grateful to the procurement team for pulling out actual real savings. In fact, IBM even gave Richter and the procurement team a mention in the annual report. So it was pretty big. And then, of course, the Purchasing magazine even awarded IBM for purchasing excellence. So I think, you have to connect the dots. You can't just do cost savings, it's cost management. And ultimate result is stock price.
Lou is with us today, and he's also one of the board members for ISEI. And do you want to just say a few words?
Yes, thank you very much for your question about cost reduction and cost management. It's critical. It's a competitive advantage, and it's really like an engine of a corporation. What is spent and how it's spent, and what can be taken out and still have the products and services you need. It's the heart of procurement. So it's extremely important. In fact, it's becoming more important. It was important in 1995. It's much more important today.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for your comments. But I think a lot of questions is around when you actually trying to manage that, whether it's 70%, 80%, 50% of your total revenue. What are some of the challenges and problems that we encounter, Jimmy?
I mean, I think I don't ever look at things as a challenge, Helen. I look at things as opportunities. The worst crisis always gives you the best opportunity. And that's something that the world of procurement and supply chain need to understand. In fact, it's the height of the crisis that procurement really shows its true value. It's easy when things are going well to show your muscle because you're growing. What happens when the market's pulling back? Okay. What happens when prices are going up like crazy? I mean, how do you go to your boss and say, how does a boss look at someone and say, you need to reduce 20% when the market price is going up 60%? Lou used the word competitive advantage. I think that's the key. Competitive advantage is to be able to moderate your price increases in a very inflationary world. So market goes up 20%, you go up 10%. Okay, you didn't go down, but at least you presented competitive advantage. And the same thing in a good time, for the buyer, that is, if the market goes down 10% and you can show that you went down 15 to 20% and it's sustainable, it's not like you squeeze the supplier. I think these are things that help you bring competitive advantage and more recognition from your own company. So yeah, it's very, very important for people to understand that opportunities keep coming. It's not challenges. And the main thing that you said, if I were to advise someone, I would simply say build inherent capability. I don't want to just single out IBM. I mean, this has been done over and over again at so many companies. Build inherent capability, because cost management is not just at the time of crisis, you throw in this so-called magic pill and everything's going to be okay. It's a long journey. I've seen companies doing a fantastic job only to lose it when there was a change in management and the new management came in with the sword and just cut off the necks of all the suppliers. And it's just a matter of time before there's another swing, there's a shortage of supply, they don't get their allocation. So it's a long-term plan. It's something that you need. Sustained competitive advantage is what I try to promote.
You just bring up a concept, inherited capability. Could you elaborate on that?
I look for something that I say is always back to education. So when we build inherent capability, you're educating the stakeholders to begin with. You're educating the partners, which could be suppliers themselves. You're educating your own people and giving them the tools. If you gave people the tools, the education, you hire the right people, that's what I call inherent capability. Because supply chains are full of knowledge, Helen. I think we are just amazed by the amount of knowledge we have in the supply base. I mean, a brilliant engineer doesn't have to be at company A or company B. They're all over the place, including the suppliers. So I think the important thing is to understand inherent capability means within the supply chain.
What you just described, inherited capability is also an embedded company culture. It takes a cross-functional effort in order to get a cost managed. Just by a procurement person or by accounting or by a cost manager, it's not enough because the 70-80% of the cost incurred across the organization. So how do you get all the cross-functional team come together and work together towards the goal?
Yeah, it starts from the top. If you start a cost management journey or initiative driven by procurement/supply chain, it's not going to work because the rest of the company will look at it as you are just price beaters and that's it. In my book, I talk about the blind man and the elephant. You know, cost is something very similar in the sense everybody thinks cost means what they touch. So just like in the blind man and the elephant, which is unknown to these blind men, can be described as a tree or a spear or a fan or a water hose, depending on which part of the elephant you touch. So cost is the same thing. To marketing, it's the cost of being late to market. What is the cost if you launch your product 1 month after you promise the market that you're going to deliver it? For logistics, it's the cost of time. If you tell me you want the parts tomorrow, it's going to cost 10x. But if you had planned better, I could have cost you X because I could have brought a different source of supply. I could have got it on land versus overnight. So engineering also, you know, what is the cost of a poor design where you have to rework it? So I think it's absolutely cross-functional and everybody has to understand, and that's back to education. What is cost? Cost is not just price. Let's go down the supply chain, dealing with the customer, not the supplier, because supply chain is not only about suppliers, it's also downstream. So I call it, what is the cost of being the most preferred customer or the most preferred partner, you know? So it's about relationships as well. What is the cost of having a bad relationship? Especially, Helen, in the semiconductor industry, I've had the opportunity to witness the good and the bad. And we are in that crisis again. So that's why I said history repeats itself. If you go back in time, there's been so many ups and downs. And the thing about semiconductors, when it goes up, it goes like a spike. When it comes down, it comes crashing, right? And you can see in a semiconductor world, whenever there's a shortage like we have right now, and one way to bring down the shortage is to reduce demand. That's not realistic. Demand is increasing. It's exploding. If demand is outstripping supply, what do? You increase supply. How do you increase supply in semiconductor industry? You have to build more wafer fabs. If you build more wafer fabs, what makes up the wafer fab? It's not people putting the wafer together, it's equipment. So it's the equipment supply. But equipment is different from creating devices. Equipment, you can't produce, 10,000 steppers a day. It's not going to happen. Equipment is always going to be a long-term investment, right? So if you as a customer have been killing and kicking your supplier, now there's a shortage of equipment because they cannot produce fast enough, but demand is there, supply is trying to match it. The only way you can get it is to go and stand in line. So it's supply chain management, and that's what I think people forget.
So this is a very rich content. I'd like to tackle a few things here. What you just described is literally every business activity. You could assign a cost tag to it.
Yes.
A good design versus a bad design, and maybe a different option of design. That's tangible. You could look at this design versus that design. But then, Jimmy, you also bring up a very powerful point about relationship, good relationship versus bad relationship that also have a cost tag to it. That's intangible. Great two examples how impactful and intertwined cost management into every organization. So the next part that I'm really excited, how would the concept that you described, the cost management philosophy and approach around it, help and improve the current supply chain crisis? There may be a hidden formula, a universal approach, transferable knowledge from your years of experience that you could help us to solve some of the problem. What would company do to combat the current supply chain crisis related to cost? Do you have any advice for a company?
Well, I think the advice is, again, look in the rearview mirror. This is not the only crisis, but if you go back, we have different things. Some of them are similar in the sense like SARS, for example. Some of them are based on tsunami or accidents taking place. Supply chain crisis comes in different forms. It's not always a virus. But I think what I always tell people is good strategy always prevails. There are certain absolute do's and don'ts. But if you had a good roadmap and the roadmap works, then you have to have the flexibility to change it a little bit, but not throw it out. So when people ask me, so Jimmy, what is the roadmap you've used, whether it's at HP or IBM or Nokia or Motorola or Shell or BP, it makes no difference. I call it the journey from leveraging volume to leveraging ideas. And that will take us into the future as well. So leveraging volume, everybody knows, right? Strategic sourcing, consolidate suppliers. Why would you need 50 suppliers for the same thing when you can do it with 2 or 3? The rear view mirror sometimes doesn't work because I don't care what happened yesterday. I want to know what's happening right now. So then at Flex, they have this thing called the Pulse Center. Fabulous information being provided from around the world. So when you analyze data and you have the ability in real time to know there's an incident, it may not be a virus, it could be an earthquake, it could be a tsunami, it could be a chemical explosion in a plant. We've seen all those things in our lives. So the important thing is, has an event taken place? I need to know that in minutes, not 20 days or 25 days later. I should know immediately what is my protocol. In other words, strategy is not all about emergencies. Strategy, you can't put a special ops team in there and have them try to figure out what to do in an emergency. They've been trained. Your job is to go out and execute what you've been trained to do. So strategy is exactly the same. So whether it's a crisis caused by a virus, whether it's a strategy, it's an issue caused by an explosion, it's the same. I've got the data. What do I do with the data? What kind of data do I need? I need to know, is this crisis located in a certain part of the world? What's my alternative geographies where I can provide this product from? Which suppliers are affected? What part numbers are being affected by those suppliers? What's the current inventory levels of those parts, etc. So it comes back to what Lou said. It's about competitive advantage. So having a strategy, leveraging volume, using technology for the best data. Price analysis is not just knowing what the historic price was, but knowing what's driving demand, what's driving supply. You talked to people in oil and gas a few years ago, when oil was at $28 to $30 a barrel. Yeah, the people in the oil industry would say, steel prices are going to crash. And you say, well, why is it going to crash? Well, because oil prices are so low, we are freezing all capital projects. So we're going to buy less steel because we're going to build less rigs, less pipes, etc. Therefore, the price will go down. But a good analyst would say, yes, but the oil and gas industry is only 6 to 7% of the total industry. The biggest consumers are automotive and construction, and that's booming. So knowledge of price, knowledge of technology, knowledge of cost. And then, of course, you put all those things together and you've got a competitive advantage.
Yeah, you just talked about speed, transparency, information, all of those related to the holistic approach of cost management. What about those uncertainties, variables that beyond anybody's control? Using inflation as an example, do you have any advice for the company that how should they think about it to maintain that cost management?
See, that's the thing about inflation. We've had such low inflation for so long that there's a generation that lives today thinking that the prices only stay flat or go down. They've forgotten the days when there was inflation 16, 20%. So I think what's important is to say, what's my objective? My objective is to beat my competitor. That's my objective, to win the money of the customer, right? So if it's looked at as this is a challenge, it's a race, and I'm supposed to use my best inherent knowledge. So how can I work with my suppliers to not go down, but beat inflation? Now, one of the things about inflation is, we know it goes up, but it also comes down. So understand this is a temporary situation. It may be a little longer this time. We don't know. Nobody knows. I don't think even the feds know. But the fact is, keep your eye on the ball. And the ball is, in an inflationary world, you will go up, but try to understand what's driving demand, what's driving supply, what can you do with relationships, what can you do with your knowledge? And the last but not the least, Helen, I didn't mention this, is leveraging ideas. During an inflationary period, you may not be able to control the price, but you can control the demand. You can control the specifications. So if you spend more effort and more time working collaboratively with suppliers, you can find ways to improve process. You can find ways to reduce cycle time. And that will be well better than inflation of 6 to 10%. So in many cases, there's been situations where we've been in inflationary periods of 10, 15%, but the cost of the item has gone down. Why? Because we found 25, 30% in a non-price savings by changing the dimensions, for example. We found ways to improve the efficiency, cutting of the display board, because a tiny display comes from a big piece of glass. We found ways to do it better, and it saved a few millions of dollars. But I think the best leverage was taking that idea. It was called a keep out ratio for those engineers in the room. Okay, it's to change the keep out ratio by using a very expensive laser, but we could go very close to the edge without shattering. That's the technology side. But the financial side was taking that idea, which saved about maybe $10, $15 million, and applying that idea to every display made by this multinational company that included television displays, monitors, laptops, fridges, and microwaves, and you name it. So they were able to take the same idea, run it across all their product lines, and the savings were hundreds of millions of dollars. So leveraging ideas, I think, is really the nirvana of cost management.
Wonderful. And thanks for all the examples. What do you think the relationship between cost and value?
Well, that's an interesting thing. And I try to teach people, including in my own family and my own life. See, cost is a monetary amount. It's how much do I pay? But it's also sometimes intangible. What's the cost of not having something? Value, in my opinion, is something very important which side of the coin you are on. A supplier will say, my price is high because don't try to look at my cost, because consider the value. And I always say, well, wait a minute. Value is what I perceive, not you. So how much am I willing to pay for something rather than go without it? That would be my definition of value. And so sometimes what we need to understand in the world of supply chain, there are many things that have low cost, high value. And there are things that have high cost and very low value. So we should be looking for the low cost, high value, not necessarily listening to a supplier say, well, this is value. Value is what I perceive.
Yeah, so optimize the value proposition,
right,
and align with your customer perceived value, minimize the cost.
Right. I don't have to spend a fortune. I'm going through it right now on a reconstruction of my home, where the designer comes up with these really fancy things. And I just got a quotation that it's almost double the original estimate. It's called scope creep. And whenever scope creeps in, you've got to challenge yourself and ask yourself, is this something I must have, or is it nice to have? And if I were to be told that this extra shine is $100,000, can I deal without the extra shine? Is the matte finish better? Simple things like that. And I think as business people, we need to always challenge ourselves. What is really valuable and what will make the difference in us either increasing revenue and or reducing cost? So don't look at value only on the cost side, look at value on the revenue side, and maybe it's worth paying that extra money to put this lovely finish on something because it will increase our revenue by X%.
Yeah, I love this example of remodeling. Many of us gone through this ourselves. Most people would say when you do remodel, you put a beautiful house together, you give a new life, and it will increase your value. So how would you describe the relationship between cost and investment?
Well, again, I think the value is what you see in it for yourself. When I'm remodeling a house right now, I'm looking at maybe hopefully about 20 years more to enjoy the asset. So to me, that is the value. I'm not doing something to sell it tomorrow, right? So there's a different way in which I would approach something. Similarly, in a business, if you are preparing something for selling the company tomorrow, you're not interested in a sustainable and something to enjoy, that you are choosing a supplier because you're working for a long term, etc. No, you're just doing it to reduce your cost, increase the value of the company, and flip it over. So it all depends on what is your goal, what is your objective.
Great. Can I ask, what is one of the best or most worthwhile investment you have ever made? I mean, that can be anything. That could be a money investment, time, energy, whatever.
Oh boy, one of the things I always tell people, I think the greatest investment is you as a person, right? So yes, I have invested in so many startups. I've invested in my own company. I've invested in stocks and bonds and real estate and whatever it is. But I think the greatest investment is in me as a human being. Because think of it, to anyone in this audience and anyone who's listening in the future, there's no asset class where you begin January 1st with a certain number and you guarantee that you will go above that number, right? Because even the best real estate, 1 year it may be going up 20%, next year it can go down 15%, 20%. But even if you earn minimum wage, and let's say you earn $30,000 or $40,000 a year, it's 30,000 more than it was last year. So I always tell people, think about yourself as the biggest investment. Take care of yourself both physically and of course, intellectually. Study more, get more experiences. That's the advice I give my children, I give my mentees, and that is take care of the biggest asset, and that's you.
Thanks. Our program hopes to build an intellectual bridge between the current and future generations. Einstein said, any intellectual fool can make things bigger and more complex. It takes a touch of genius and a lot of courage to move in the opposite direction. Even though supply chain is one of the most dynamic and complex systems, we could make it simpler and easier to understand. So Jimmy, to help our audience unravel the technical subject, how would you paint a picture for cost management by giving it a new perspective?
Wow, first of all, I don't think I can take on Einstein. This whole issue of cost, it focus on the word management, not on the word cost. Manage cost just like you would manage a portfolio. Learn to invest in the right cost. So sometimes you spend more money, not less money. But you need to know, when do I spend more money for the greater good? When do I spend less money? Cost, to me, it's like a fire. You need fire. It provides heat. It provides light sometimes. But if fire is not managed, it can go uncontrolled, and then it gets into real devastation. So cost is something, it's part of a business. The basic formula in business, revenue minus cost equals profit.
So in the spirit of having a conversation with you and exchange ideas, I also have an analogy to share. So cost is like a body fat. Your body needs healthy fats for energy and other functions. Specifically, body fat is essential to maintain life and the reproductive functions as a source of energy and a primary storage for energy. However, not all fats are healthy, and too much fat may cause heart disease. That said, cost plays similar roles in keeping our business going. To stay healthy and fit, a successful organization requires proactive and consistent cost management to balance necessary spending, equivalent to good fat, and wasteful cost, equivalent to harmful fat. Any question that you would like to ask?
I wanted to ask you a quick question about when you're talking about inflation. So you had mentioned a good way to work with this is essentially earn customer dollars. And the way we can do that is by working with demand from a buyer side. But isn't demand from buying based on demand generation from customers, right? And isn't that kind of a marketing idea more than a procurement idea, trying to get demand from customers? Isn't it predicated on that? And if so, how can procurement help with that?
Well, Joe, that's a good question. And my answer is demand is not the theoretical economic demand. When I talk about demand, for example, if I hold up my phone, there's a certain amount of plastic, okay? And maybe the demand is 100 million phones, and that's not changing. So how do I change my demand for plastic? By finding ways to either use alternative plastic, to make it thinner, to reduce the amount of wastage, so to improve the yield. So if I use X amount of plastic to make 100 million phones and the 100 million is not going up or down, well, maybe by improving my yield by X amount, I buy 0.9x plastic to do the exact same. So my demand for the raw material has gone down 10% without any demand in the final product changing.
Jimmy, when it comes to cost management, obviously you need a long-term perspective, a strategy, but you also have to deal with unexpected short-term crisis, right? Because the efforts that you described, some of this takes very long time, in order to source the right material, the right location, testing to differentiate one option from the other, the alternative opportunities. I would only imagine that the strategy that you described earlier contain all of this.
Absolutely, Helen. And that's what I talked about strategy. See, strategy is you've got to sit down during good or bad periods, think through what is my goal, what are the possible contingencies I have to sort of plan for. You can't predict it, but you can plan for it and then execute it. See, I think the biggest problem is we start reacting in a crisis out of panic. But the really top companies have already done that. They've planned for it. They know there's going to be a shortage. They know during a shortage, this is what they have to do. So execute. You plan, you train for it, you hope it never ever happens. But if it does come about, this is what we have to do. And that would include everything from calling in the shots, having relationships at a CEO level, where CEO to CEO, one phone call, and you've got your product in a time of crisis. Now, that's something you can't start developing that strategy during the crisis. This should have already been developed, and now it's just executed.
Great. We may have time to take the very last question.
Just following on with what Joe was asking, the rise in inflation and the issues in supply chain, do you see that as really ongoing, or do you think it's just short term? And also, I read on Bloomberg that about 2% of the inflation is due to the used car market being so high in terms of pricing. So what are your thoughts on that?
To begin with, inflation is just one of many cycles you will encounter during a longer period or longer career. So just keep that in mind. The second thing I'd like everybody to understand is the word inflation is a very general term. When we hear today inflation's at 7%, it's going up to 9%. Okay, what does it mean? It's the consumer price index. So I'm more concerned about specific commodities or categories that are required for, let's say, if I were a manufacturer. So I've got to understand those items. Unfortunate thing is we lump inflation and use it as an excuse. In fact, typically the cycle's about 7 years. So I could say I've experienced at least 5 economic cycles in 35 years in this profession. And I can tell you only one thing. Just because inflation goes up 7, 8, 9% doesn't mean that the category that I'm buying, plastics or steel or chemicals or whatever. So please make that differentiation. Inflation is a general term, and suppliers use it, or rather misuse it, to the naive buyer by simply saying, oh, well, inflation is 7 or 8%, so you've got to increase your price by 8%. Oh, hang on. Number one, my cost is not 100% based on a CPI, all right? I've got plastics, I've got electronics, and the technology could drive the raw material down 25%, and raw material could be 60% of my cost. So that's what I mean by understand the cost, understand what's driving cost, understand the demand drivers, the supply drivers, the cost drivers. Nobody can come and say, inflation's up 8%, give me a 5% increase, thinking that, oh, wow, I'm such a nice guy, I'm giving you a 5% increase in an 8% inflation. No, you did price discipline, Ariel, that if I break it down, especially when I get into currencies and technology and volume and things like that, my price could actually go down.
Great. This is a good place to wrap up today's conversation. Before we end, I would like to thank everyone who participated in the lively discussion and hope you have learned a few things. I also want to thank our supporting team, Melanie, Jeremy, Heidi, and Irene from ISEI. Finally, we appreciate Jimmy for sharing your years of experience and wisdom about the critical subject of cost management. We look forward to seeing you again in the next episode. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Oceanside Chat. We hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you liked it, please share this podcast and stay tuned for our next episode. We'll see you later.